Thank you so much for having me. My name is Erin Willett. I am a hippie. I am a rebel with a cause. I am a lover of individuality. I'm a connector. I'm a communicator. Professionally, what I do is brand and culture strategy. And what that means is that I help companies to connect with themselves so they can more deeply connect with the people around them. Specifically, I help leaders articulate vision and values and use that sense of self-awareness to deepen bonds with their teams, with their markets, with their partners, with the other stakeholders that are going to help them to succeed. We've heard from some very amazing presenters who've talked about data, who've talked about science, who've talked about culture from a broader sense looking at companies. I want to look at culture from the standing point of leaders, from individuals. And I want all of you to take the moment with me today to think about yourselves as leaders and think about the impact that each of you can have and do have on the culture that you build around you. I am talking about this from a standing point of individuality because I am obsessed with individuality, and I have been obsessed with my own identity from as far back as I can remember. So I'm going to start this talk from a very personal standpoint, this summer of the identity crisis. My mother told me this summer that she thought I was having an identity crisis. I was saying some very big statements like, I see it all so clearly now, I know exactly what I need to do, I need to change in this way and in that way, and I made some very big choices that fundamentally shifted my personal and professional life very much. And when my mother told me that she thought I was having an identity crisis, I did some research into the notion, and I realized that yes, I was going through an identity crisis. And in fact, I've been through 3 of them in the last 10 years. And I have to tell you right now that I'm the sort of person who loves identity crises. I very actively lean into change, and I am a big, big cheerleader and a big advocate of people who also are leaning into change. When I see people who are making choices that take them off the beaten path, that bring them in a direction that's a little bit more them and a little less company, a little less parents, a little less friends, a little less competition, I'm always the person who's going to be like, yes, do it, do it. Because when we have identity crises, these are opportunities for us to reflect, to become more connected with ourselves, to realign, and to think about the future that we're building. So one identity crisis, actually before I tell you this one, I'd like to say, okay, so there's some very small hashtags down at the bottom. Lead with Courage. There's also at the Tap-In team. And so I'm from Canada, and my parents are going to be watching my Insta stories later. So if you want to take photos of me or video, I would greatly appreciate it, and so would they. Thank you very much. Okay, so identity crisis in 2011. At the time, I was working at a design agency, and this identity crisis was very important to me because it was the one that led to entrepreneurship and freelancing and me being my own boss. And I was working at this design agency. This was my first taste of a very, very toxic culture. I was micromanaged by the 3 bosses. I didn't have a sense of creativity. They didn't allow me to have a sense of creativity. They didn't allow me to contribute to vision, to strategy. Essentially, I existed there to create outputs for them. And I thought to myself, oh my God, is this my life? Do I need to climb the corporate ladder? Is this just the path that people have to take when they're building up their careers? Thank God I had the flash that said, no, I don't have to climb that corporate ladder. I can make choices for myself. So the next day I quit the job, and I started working with small tech companies, young tech companies, startups, who needed help with their storytelling, who needed help with articulating who they were and why they did what they did. And I was acting as a creative director for them, and I would ask them questions like, who are you? Why do you exist? What makes you different? Who are you trying to connect with? And I was constantly met with blank stares, blank faces, and they'd say, look, Erin, this is our product, this is our service, we're the Uber of whatever industry, we want a logo like Google, and we want packaging like Apple. Can you make it happen or what? And this happened over and over and over again. And I realized these companies and these leaders were getting in line behind someone else's story of success. And they weren't the only ones who were getting in line behind Google and Apple. There were tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of other entrepreneurs who were standing in line behind Apple and Google. Why? And how does this connect to the identity crisis story that I started with? Well, with every identity crisis that I've had, it's forced me to look at the story that I myself am writing and question whether this is my story of success or whether I am subscribing to someone else's. To, as I mentioned, my parents, my competitions, my friends, my industry, my market. Am I making choices about my life because I deeply want to, because they're right for me? Or am I making choices for my life because someone else told me this is what I was supposed to do? The companies that I was working with in 2011 hadn't yet articulated what their storyline was. So they were subscribed to someone else's story of success. I exist in a society, I'm not sure what the Turkish society is like about this, but I exist in a society that tells stories in linear lines. So we have checkpoints and milestones that are supposed to indicate that we've reached some level of happiness and some level of success and fulfillment. This is a storyline that we're sold, but it is not the reality. Think about these storylines of success that we are sold. Okay, blah, 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 then you live happily ever after. Think about the successful storyline of your career. You go to university, you graduate, you find an internship, hopefully at a company that you relatively like, you climb the ladder there, you become partner, you retire with a great severance package, and you live happily ever after. Think about the successful storylines that we're told around relationships. You date, you fall in love, you get engaged, you marry, you have kids, you buy a house, maybe the house comes before the kids, you watch the kids grow up, you retire, you live happily ever after. The same goes with storylines that we tell about companies. We see upward-facing graphs that are supposed to indicate financial success. We see stock photos of smiling business people shaking hands and closing deals. We hear about overnight successes. These stories, what they teach us is that we need to keep our moments of hardship to ourselves. The successful storylines teach us that we need to maintain a facade of success rather than telling the true story and the challenge that we're going through. The thing is that eventually we learn what all of us hopefully know right now, which is no story can be tied up with a perfect little bow. Nothing is perfect. Change is always happening. Mess is always happening. Every single one of us here is going to be faced with challenge and change and identity crises that force us to face our convictions and face our sense of self. All of us will be faced with the challenge of change. And in fact, your company, same goes, the challenge of change for individuals and for companies. Your company is going to go through an identity crisis. Many identity crises are coming your way. Congratulations, I support you. The thing is, I believe, that the more identity crises you face, the better you are doing. Because every identity crisis is an opportunity for you to become more self-aware, to become more confident, to have stronger sense of conviction, to realign and to position yourself strategically for the future that you want to build. When does an identity crisis come for the company? When you're growing your team, when you're facing a new market, when you're facing pending competition, when you're merging or you've been acquired. All of these moments will launch you into an identity crisis. I, unfortunately, have seen so many leaders who, rather than lean into the crisis, rather than lean into change, will shy away from it. They will try to desperately hold on to their comfort zone using the same sorts of communication and connection tactics that they were using before the crisis started. What does that look like in an organization? It looks like leaders telling success stories rather than being honest with their teams about what's actually going on, which means there's a lack of transparency. The team doesn't understand what is motivating their work, and therefore they need to be micromanaged. Leadership will use fear tactics in order to incite productivity, and they'll give their team quantitative objectives that are supposed to light a fire under their butt, but really what it does for their team is that it leaves them confused and distrustful and disconnected, disengaged, which means that collaboration lowers, there's less accountability, there's less autonomy. The team is generally disconnected, not communicating, not collaborating, and that means that creatively they will stagnate, because creativity cannot happen in an environment that's honest. When you are telling a perfect success story, when you are trying to sell this everything's fine line to your team, they are not buying it. Your team doesn't expect you to be perfect as a leader. They don't expect your company to not face any bumps, but they do expect you to be honest. I love this quote by Ernest Hemingway because it really, really proves my point right now. If it is all beautiful, you can't believe in it. If we hear stories that sound too perfect, we instantly create space between ourselves and the person in front of us because we don't buy it. We don't buy it as individuals, and the same will go for your team. If it seems too perfect, they're disconnected. Courageous leaders don't tell stories of success. They tell stories of growth. They lean into the stories of growth. I'll pause because there are some photos being taken, which I really appreciate. Thank you so much for doing that. Okay, so courageous leaders tell stories of growth. Leaders don't lead over the peaks of success when everything's going well. Leaders lead through the valleys of hardship, through the valleys of identity crisis, through the valleys of change. Leaders actually set the tone for how teams will face that change and how teams will face the identity crisis. And that means that all of you here are guides for change, which means that you need to be comfortable in the discomfort. This is a line that I remind myself of often when I am uncomfortable. You, as a leader, need to accept the change, acknowledge it, lean into it, be honest about what it is that you're facing. If you accept yourself and the hardship that you're facing, your team is more likely to do the same. If you lean into change, your team will lean into change. That, for me, means that courageous companies, because that's the title of this talk, what makes courageous companies start with self-acceptance. Self-acceptance from leadership. What does self-acceptance look like? It looks like honesty about where you're actually at. It looks like acknowledging you don't have all the answers, acknowledging that you're not perfect. It looks like being vulnerable about the emotions that are coming up for you. It looks like being honest about your beliefs and your convictions and your values and telling your team what you sincerely care about. A beautiful thing happens when leaders accept themselves as they are. When leaders bring their whole personal selves to the conversation, when they step forward with their emotions and with honesty, they create space for their team to do the same. For me, I'm going to take this one step further because I'm very lovey-dovey, so I want to use the word love, and this works so well with everyone's talk from this morning. Leaders who start with self-love nurture creative teams. Why? How? Because for me, self-acceptance only takes us so far with courage in companies. Leaders need to not only accept where they're at, they need to appreciate it. They need to appreciate themselves. They need to appreciate what they know and do not know, what they're great at, what they're not so great at. You need to appreciate what you believe in, your convictions, your values. You need to love yourselves a little bit more. When you love yourselves, there's less ego involved. There's more respect for the other. There's more room for the other. And this is when this sort of thing happens. Courage from leadership means creativity from the team. Courage from leadership is being honest about who you are, loving who you are. When you do that, you create room at the table for other individuals, for other people who are multifaceted to show up at the conversation. And this is when communication happens. This is when collaboration happens. This is when challenging each other happens. And this is when creativity can really take hold and you can build real solutions together. This is what I call creative courage in organizations. Creative courage starts with a shared vision. Where's my pointer? That's my pointer. Shared vision. A shared vision with the team who is honest, collaborative, communicative, vocal about their opinions. I love that. Not afraid of saying no to certain projects and people and markets, and they tackle problems head on. Don't we all want this? Right, yeah, I think, okay. Don't we all need this? Yes. Thank you so much for the enthusiasm. We do need this. Courageous companies, we need you so desperately right now, because courageous, creative teams lean into their own evolution and growth. They're not afraid of changing. They're not afraid of growing, and that means that they lean into change in general. And right now, change is upon us. Think about the current political and environmental situation that we all live and work and play in. This moment in time requires change. And the courageous companies are the ones who are going to lean into it. I'm not the only one who believes that evolution is necessary right now. Your team, your customers, the planet, they desperately want you to be a courageous company. Your team is going to choose to work with you if they can find meaning in their work, if they can have a positive impact on their collective, on their society, on the planet. And people will choose to work for that sort of team over one where they'll get a big paycheck. Your market wants courageous companies desperately because they're voting with their dollar now more than ever, which means that they want to align themselves with organizations who have a strong sense of purpose, who have a strong vision, who make choices based on their values. And the planet. The planet can no longer sustain cowardly organizations, ones that aren't facing change. The planet needs us to solve the problems that we're facing, and the courageous companies are the ones who are going to do that. Transition is inevitable. It's upon us. Big change is happening in front of us and for every single one of us. An identity crisis is coming, my friends. Change is inevitable. Choosing to face it with courage is not. I said it before, but I'm going to say it again. As a leader, you set the tone for how your team is going to face change. So right now, I want to dare you. I want to dare you, every single one of you, to lean into your identity crisis. What is your gut telling you? What change do you need to be making as a leader? I dare you to be more honest with yourself. I dare you to be more honest with your team. I dare you to lean into the change that your gut and your team and your market and the planet are encouraging you to make. I dare you to tell stories of self-love, not of success. Stories of self-love are honest and they're transparent about where you're at now and where it is that you want to go. When you accept where it is that you are now, when you love where it is that you are now, you create an environment where your team can become courageous and creative. Your self-love is contagious for your team. Your courage is contagious. Courageous companies build magnetic movements. Courageous companies build magnetic movements, which means they attract, they retain the people around them, not just their team, their markets, and their partners. Why? Because they're not building relationships based on transactions. They're being bold about the things that they're doing. They're being vocal about their opinions. They're making choices based on the things that they believe in. I deeply believe that courageous companies who are building these magnetic movements are the ones who are going to create safer and happier work environments. They're the ones who are going to create communities that are more collaborative. And honestly, I believe that they're the ones who are going to save the world. So, leaders, I want to leave you with this. I hope that you leave this moment with that sense of me daring you and me maybe in your ears saying, I dare you, to tread courageously, lean in to your identity crisis, lean in to your self-love. Thank you.